Okay, so here's a quick tutorial on manually clustering in JClust2, and we'll be clustering in a 3D feature space. So quick note here, if you want to cluster classically in a 2D feature space, you would just set your channel combo to one of the two wires in a particular feature space, and you could just go ahead and use the 2D poly tool, which is covered in the introduction video. So now if we want to cluster in a 3D space, what we'll do is we'll select a particular feature space to cluster in, and right now we're in the concatenated waveform PC scores feature space, and we'll just switch to a 3D view to see generally what this will look like. And so this is kind of what our clusters will look like in this feature space, and we'll proceed over to this manual 3D button in the clustering algorithms button group. We'll click it to begin. So what pops up here is a mini GUI, a sub GUI, which contains the 4 possible projections of your 3 different combinations of wires. So from here we'll essentially pick one projection that we want to cluster in, and they all look pretty good, honestly. So it doesn't really matter. I'd say the top 2 look probably better than the bottom 2. So let's say for now I'll just cluster on this top right projection here. So we'll click, now that we've selected the plot that we want to cluster on, we'll then proceed to click Add a Cluster, and from here we will select one of these clusters that we want to cluster essentially, and we'll select the vertices of that cluster to begin. So I'll start with this cluster here, and I'll zoom in on it to kind of get a good sense of where I want to select vertices. Using the brush tool, I'll begin selecting these vertices. So I'm holding down Shift with the brush tool as I'm selecting these vertices, and then I'm rotating around to get. I want to get a good number of vertices around this cluster. The more you have, the better, honestly. So we'll proceed in this fashion. Okay, that looks pretty solid. Again, we'll rotate around our cluster, see what we have, and I'd say, yeah, it's pretty solid here. So at this point, after you've selected all your vertices with the brush tool and holding down Shift, we'll now double-click on the plot, and we'll get our highlighted cluster here. And so that essentially, as you can see by the legend in each of these clusters, in each of these plots rather, that will be our cluster 1. Similarly, we can go along, and again, sorry, sometimes the color of the clusters tends to disappear in MATLAB's 3D view. Again, that's a problem with the scatter function, but if you rotate around it, it'll eventually reappear. So let's say I want to cluster this next guy here. Again, we'll do the same thing, and I'll be brief about this just to show you quickly the other 2 functions here, which are deleting a cluster and saving a cluster. So again, I'll add a cluster, and now I'll begin clustering the second unit, and I'll do kind of a rough job here. And again, I'll rotate through. It looks pretty good. So now I will double click again, and now I'll have my highlighted second cluster. Let's see if we can find it. Okay. So here there's a couple points that probably shouldn't belong. I was probably too loose with the vertices selection. Also, another thing is, if you're unhappy with the vertices selection during that step, you can right-click on the plot, and it will remove all your current vertices, and then you can reselect your current vertices. But let's just say I'm not happy with this cluster. I could edit it after saving all the clusters, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I'll just show you how to delete a cluster, and it's very simply just enter the number of the cluster you wish to delete. So we wish to delete cluster 2, and it goes away. And then finally, for saving clusters, again, it's intuitive. Just click the Save All Clusters button, say yes, we're satisfied. Then the sub GUI closes, and we're back into our main GUI page. And here we have our saved cluster, cluster 1 with 197 spikes, which is this cluster here.